When do you think is the time that maybe they need to come to someone like you because they just don't seem to be equipped to be able to pull themselves out? So when would you recommend that become an option for someone to deal with these issues?
Yeah, I think the biggest sign is going to be when whatever you're dealing with is really affecting your day-to-day life. So maybe that looks like you're unable to get out of bed in the morning, you're not interacting with your family in a way that's typical for you. You're more emotional than typical, you're isolating too much, like just the ripple effects are getting bigger, right? And your day-to-day life's really being affected in a negative way. I think that's a great time to just get a third party in on the situation, And that's what's so great about a therapist is you can talk to them so freely. You don't have to worry about hurting their feelings, or you don't have to listen to us back the way that you might with your spouse. You might want to listen after you talk for a while. Like, you get the whole floor for the whole time. And it's just such a good chance to say things that need to be said, hear yourself saying some things out loud so your brain can process it in a different way than when you sit at home on the couch alone thinking about it all. So yeah, I would say, like, if your spouse is coming to you and saying, I'm concerned, try to really take heed and hear what they're saying, and be willing, even if you've never had a counselor before. It's not as scary, or I don't know, it's not as bad as you think it is.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Job Seeker's Journey podcast, a podcast from a job seeker to all job seekers. I knew when I started the podcast that we were going to cover all of the technical aspects of a job search: revising your resume, finding a recruiter, preparing for interviews, what are the current job trends, all of those things. And I promise we are going to cover all of those things extensively and a lot. But I knew that it was just as important to talk about mental and physical health. Why? Because if you don't have those things in check, then that can affect all of those other technical things that we were just talking about. So today is the first in a series on mental and physical health. Today, we're going to talk about the psychology of losing your job. We're going to talk about how losing your job is a lot like going through stages of grief, like when you lose a loved one. We're going to talk about why it's not healthy to have your identity in your job. We're going to talk about, if you are a spouse, what to look for as your loved one is going through job loss and going through those stages of grief. And we're also going to talk about when to recommend or when to go to a professional if you notice that they are not able to get through those stages of grief. So today, we are going to talk to a licensed counselor and supervisor named Anna Needham. Anna began a career providing individual and group counseling to those on inpatient psychiatric units, as well as outpatient mental health evaluations and court-ordered counseling to those on probation and parole. Her focus was running an employment resources program, helping people develop the skills and resources to find meaningful employment and avoid returning back into the criminal justice system. She moved to Texas in 2013 and opened her first private practice, where she served the rural communities of the Texas Panhandle. As that business grew into a group practice, Anna became a licensed supervisor, enabling her to mentor and oversee recent graduates on their path to becoming a fully licensed counselor in Texas. In 2023, her family moved here to Oklahoma, and she opened a new practice, Needham Counseling, offering virtual trauma counseling services to adults in Colorado, Texas, and Oklahoma. She utilizes many highly effective forms of therapy, including EMDR. I am very excited to have her join the podcast, and I know that this will be helpful for all of you who are experiencing a job loss. So without further ado, here is Anna Needham. Hi, Anna.
Hey there.
It's good to see you. It's kind of fun to do this. Full disclosure, I know you well. We live close to each other. Our kids play together, and eventually we'll go to the same school. But
Yeah.
um, it's I like doing things like this because I haven't gotten to talk to you about what you do, and it just happened to align with what the goal of the podcast was, and so I'm so happy that you decided to join us today and lend your expertise to
Yeah.
us.
Well, thank you for the opportunity and thanks for having me on your new podcast.
Sure, yeah, of course. So kind of get going. I've never really done or been around much with like psychology. I don't have any family that got into the field of psychology, but what kind of called you to want to get into psychology? Because obviously, and in looking at your bio, I saw that you um, started out helping people transition out of jobs. So what kind of called you to want to be in this field?
Yeah. Well, honestly, growing up, I saw a lot of pain just all around me. And for whatever reason, at a young age, I noticed, especially at church, like people would come in, put on a smile, but I could tell there was pain behind their eyes. And I always wondered, like, you know, what's going on? Why do they put on a smile? Why do people say I'm good, I'm great? I was always curious about the pain that I could see a little deeper. So I think the Lord was just calling me to this profession. I knew that I'd go into it. I think I was the only friend in my friend group that didn't change majors in college. I was just pretty steadfast. So yeah, I've just always had a heart to help people with the pain that they were feeling and help them find like hope and healing.
Sure. Yeah, I mean it's kind of one of those things, this podcast came out of, obviously, started going through it because I lost my job in September unexpectedly. And as I got to watching on LinkedIn and seeing all of the people who were struggling to find a new job, didn't really know where to go. You get one recruiter that says one thing and then says this is bad, that you have short stints, for instance, or and then other people that say, I don't really care about that. If you're a good fit, you're constantly dealing with a lot of things, and there's people who are just searching for answers. I just knew it hurt my heart every time I saw the post. I saw so many yesterday, and it just hurts every time when I see somebody who's saying, "Gosh, I'm getting close to not being able to pay for pay our mortgage, and our unemployment benefits have run out, and all of these things." And it just hurts me. So, that's kind of what called me to want to do this podcast. So I totally understand just feeling that calling of wanting to help. So obviously when someone goes through a job loss, especially if it's sudden, if it's a sudden layoff, if they get fired unexpectedly, if they're like me and they live in a right to work state where a company doesn't have to have a reason. They
Mhm.
just they can just let you go legally just because. It's obviously a traumatic experience. Even if you see it coming, it's traumatic. But as I got to researching, the psychology behind losing your job, I kept coming across so many sources that would state that, the emotions of a job loss is much like going through different stages of grief of, losing a loved one. So what are those stages of grief for people who may not remember exactly what they are? I'm sure people know some of them, but
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and these are things we've all experienced because These stages are very generalized, so we can apply them and think about them across all different areas of our life, no matter what we're grieving or what our loss is. These will apply. So I'll say them just first, but know too, like they don't always happen in this order. So I'm sure you hear people talk about like everybody grieves differently and try not to place expectations on yourself or compare, all that kind of stuff. And it just is so true. So the stages are denial, anger, bargaining, depression/anxiety, and then acceptance. Okay, so that denial, if you just kind of want to walk through them for a minute, that denial is just that shock, right? Like, I can't believe this happened. Did this really happen? Is this a bad dream? Um, just that desperation of like, man, I hope I wake up tomorrow and this isn't true. So sometimes that shock and denial can last for a while. It may take us a while to just get a grip on, okay, this actually happened, you know?
Mm-hmm.
The anger, that's going to be like where you're starting to have some emotion about it. So you realize this is actually happening, but you're really mad about it, right? And that's justified, especially like when it's unexpected, you just didn't see it coming, or maybe you're angry about like, how am I going to provide for my family, for myself? So that anger presents in different ways. You might find yourself being irritable, more irritable than typical for you, lashing out, um, just that on edge feeling, right? Like your family might start walking on eggshells around you, that
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing. Okay, so bargaining is next. That's where we kind of go through all the what ifs, or maybe I should have done this differently. If I do this differently, then dot, 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 like, can I get my job back? Or maybe just praying like, God, if I do this, then I'll be the like most perfect person the rest of my life. Like, just give me my job back and I'll do whatever. Like,
Mm-hmm.
we just really try to bargain our way out of the situation because we realize it's happening, but we so desperately don't want to be dealing with it. We don't want to be in this space. So then depression, anxiety, like that can really start to set in. And that is so common, normal, typical. Someone walking in this through this situation really is going to deal with that for sure. So that's going to look different for everybody. Changes in eating or sleeping. So sleeping too much or sleeping too little, eating too much, eating too little. Again, like that irritability, maybe anxiety is present with like racing thoughts, tossing and turning at night, catastrophic thinking, like just taking things too far in your mind. All of those can be signs and symptoms of depression and anxiety. Um, Two, like losing your sense of direction, that would be really
Mm-hmm.
common, I think, in this situation. You're not sure what your next steps can be, and that can be really overwhelming. You're not sure where to turn. You might even go through days or weeks where you lack motivation, and that's a symptom of depression. So, really good things to watch out for. Eventually, you will get to the acceptance stage, and that's just where you're like, okay, and that doesn't even necessarily have to be like when your end goal happens, right? Maybe you'll come to the acceptance stage before you even reach whatever your goal is, but it's just a place where you have a little bit more peace, a little bit more like constant in your life. You're not going up and down all the time emotionally. You have some direction and you just are a little bit more hopeful, probably.
Mm. One of the things that I've kind of noticed, one with myself, but two with a lot of my peers that I've known who've lost their job, especially men, is that they tend to just jump right into the next thing, right?
Sure.
I know a lot of people that on the same day just immediately start applying.
Mm,
Maybe they've kept up with their resume, they update it real quick, and they just start applying to things just to because that's what they feel like they just need to do. Um, do you feel like people need to maybe it feels like people should take a second. Am I on the right track with that? I mean, I think if you just jump into it, you don't allow yourself to feel anything. If you are angry, you don't let yourself feel anything. You just jump into the next thing. If you are sad, it doesn't, like, you just can't jump into it. So, I mean, if you had somebody come that was one of your clients and they came to you and said, "I just lost my job,"
Mhm.
um, what would you kind of advise them to do? Would it be to take a second, or what would you say to them?
Yeah, man, I would just sit with them and help them to take a deep breath first. Because, yeah, and of course, there are all kinds of different situations out there. And some people might be in a situation where they absolutely need to find a job right away, no matter what it is, right? Just to get any kind of money coming in. So we get that. Um, but yeah, like if you can take a step back and if you have a little bit of breathing room, like to where you don't have to immediately get something right away, um, taking a breath is a really good idea. Letting yourself process what happened. And the reason is you're not going to be your best self walking into interviews, filling out these applications. You're going to be presenting a part of yourself that's shocked, in denial, maybe feeling really desperate. And that's not probably not what you want to be portraying, right?
Mm-mm.
Um, and it just doesn't give your mind, you're not giving your mind the chance to like catch up to everything that's happening. Um, so, yeah, giving yourself some time to just take a deep breath, think about what's happening, how it's affecting you, how it's affecting the people around you, just process it a little bit, and that can be an ongoing process. Um, but yeah, it's always good to just recognize what's happening inside of us, outside of us, around us, and then go from there.
Yeah. I remember my mom saying whenever my father went through, a job loss or something like that she just didn't know what to do.
Mm.
Um especially the first time. I know my wife Megan was the same way when I went through my first job loss. Neither one of us knew what to do. Um but it was hard for her to know how to recognize or even support what I may have been going through. For her, what would you tell if someone is the spouse of someone? Is there a way to re- help their spouse recognize maybe that they're in a specific stage of grief, and maybe try to help them? I don't want to say necessarily move past it, but be able to process it, deal with it, and be able to eventually move past it.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that you even think about that, about the spouse and just what the experiences is like for them. Cause that is hard. That's really hard. Honestly, like this is where pulling on any communication skills you have is going to be helpful. The strongest and biggest of those, most important, is going to be listening,
Mm,
right? So have a curious mind. Like ask your spouse, what's going through your head?
mm,
What are what are you thinking? Are you are you giving yourself time to like be sad about what you just lost? Because I'm sad that you lost it too. Um, talk about that loss together. Because job loss isn't just in the moment, right? It's probably like loss of future ideas, plans that you had. Anytime we're in a job, we're usually thinking ahead, like, what, am I going to be here for a while? What's that going to look like? Is this where I'm going to retire from? Whatever it may be. So you don't just lose what's current, you also lose those hopes or dreams or plans. And yeah, I mean, whoever you do life with, like, those were their hopes and dreams and plans too. So just giving each other space to talk about that, really listening, um, allowing each other to grieve differently. So, this is something I talk about with any couple that I'm working with who's going through any sort of loss, grieving anything, is please be sure to be aware of how you're allowing your spouse to grieve, because it's going to look different than how you're grieving, and trying as hard as you can not to place expectations on how the other person should be doing things or shouldn't be doing things. Um, just taking that off the table, but communicating about it. Two, I think asking your spouse that lost their job, like, what do you need from me? What can I do for you? Do you like it when I'm upbeat and encouraging and like try to brighten your day? Or right now, do you need me to sit with you in the valley? Do you want me to cry with you? Do you want me to be angry with you? What's going to help you today or this week? That's a great question, because sometimes probably for women, we might think like, oh, I'm going to be his encourager and I'm going to wake up and I'm going to make him breakfast and I'm going to like have a suit ready for interviews and whatever it may be. And that could really make your husband mad if that's not what he's needing that day. He may not want a cheerleader. Now he may need that down the road and want that down the road, but today he may just want you to be like really bummed with him, or really angry with him. So just asking what you can do, what your spouse needs, that goes a long way.
Yeah, it's tough all the way around, and a lot of guys specifically that I've talked to in this, that's been going through this, is they feel this sense of responsibility. I've lost my job. I'm not bringing in income. I don't feel like I'm taking care of my family. It's the identity of my job and what that, and even more than just the identity of the job you have. I know that's big for a lot of people, and it certainly was for me the first time that I lost my job. It was part of my identity, and that's what I did. But as I've gotten older, I've kind of realized that for me, a lot of what that identity more is to be helping with providing. And especially now that we have a little one, it's even more so, because you want to provide for her. You see that college is coming. You want them to not have to necessarily change as much as possible because you lost your job, right? Like for me, our daughter's name is Crosby. I don't want her to have to give something up,
right?
Just because I suddenly lost my job.
Right.
So, and then over time, you kind of realize, once you've lost your job the first time, a lot of times that identity that gets tied to the job kind of goes away, because you realize that job can go away in a second.
Yep.
And so, that famous phrase of like, if you died, they'll post your job within a week, right? So your identity really shouldn't be in that, but I get why it is. So can you kind of speak on identity and how it just shapes a person's life?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's actually one of my favorite things to dive into with clients, and I do that kind of work all the time. The key here is considering where you have placed your weight and your identity, and have I placed it in things that are changing, that could go away, that could be taken away from me? Because if so, then we probably want to make some shifts, right? We really want our identity to be grounded in things that are unchanging. So these are things that are sometimes really hard to identify about ourselves if we've never thought about it before. And it's so easy, especially in the American culture, to place our identity in our achievements and our job title and what we do every day. And the reality is that those things can be taken away from us, like you said, and then where are we? We're left with so much lack, and
Mm-hmm.
kind of floundering. So, um, thinking about what is true about me that I can stand on that can't be taken away, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, if you'll allow me, I'll give a little analogy.
Sure.
I work with adults, and most adults have held a little baby, right? Whether it's your own child or maybe a family member or a friend, but we can all relate to just holding a precious little life in our hands, especially like a little newborn, so snuggly. And we innately, without question, all know how much value this little life has, right? Nobody questions that. Nobody's waiting for them to accomplish anything, to see what they do out in the world, to see what they can do for us. Like, no, we just know that we want to protect this little life. We want to nurture this little person. They are so loved, and they haven't done a darn thing to earn it, right? In fact, they like take and take, like they need things in order to survive. And we give all of those things to them, and yet we still know how valuable they are. So what I do with clients is help them be reminded that they are that little soul, right? Like you were that little baby. Your life has inherent worth and value. You don't have to accomplish, you don't have to earn a title to have that. So that's kind of a starting point, just recognizing that you have value, you have worth, you're important, you're loved, you're cared for, and you don't have to earn it. That's a starting point for figuring out like what is my identity? What are the qualities in me that I innately have that can't be taken away?
And I think along the same lines of identity, whether a person is willing to admit it or not, one of the feelings that does come up is just the emotion of a social stigma. You get embarrassed, you feel ashamed that you lost your job. Now that you have free time during the week, maybe you're at Lowe's or somewhere during the day when you wouldn't have been there.
Yeah.
And, you see all your neighbors going to work and you're not. And in your mind, you feel like everyone's now judging you, that, they're thinking, oh man, like, what did he do, or something like that. But,
Yeah.
and that'll start to lead to you isolating yourself, because now you feel like everyone, that's all they're thinking about is that, oh, I see this person, they lost their job, and, wow, he must really stink at his job, or whatever you think happens. So you start to isolate yourself. But obviously isolating yourself is not a good thing. But what are some of those dangers that comes with isolating yourself?
Yeah. Well, and even just to back up for a second and like talk about that shame and that
Mm-hmm.
social stigma. Um, yeah, I mean, we've all felt that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we don't want to dwell in that. It's actually really good to recognize when you are feeling that and experiencing that, like just that embarrassment, that shame, worried about what people are thinking. But trying really hard not to dwell there and stay there. Again, like your identity comes in here, right? Like it doesn't matter what they think. And the reality is, most people are not thinking as worse things as you are, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
you're thinking like, oh, they're going to think I'm a loser that doesn't have a job, that no, nobody's thinking that. Like your neighbors are not like, he's a loser. Nobody's thinking that. They're probably like, man, that stinks. Like, I hope he finds something soon, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that's probably what most people think. We are way harder on ourselves than other people are. So just remembering that is really good. But yeah, recognizing, what was your question? Like recognizing when you're kind of walking
Yeah.
and stepping into
Yeah.
that.
So when you start to isolate yourself, what are kind of those dangers that
Yeah.
come up from that?
Well, for sure, risk of depression, right? Depression, anxiety, getting stuck in that, or it worsening when you isolate yourself. The anger, the irritability can just grow because, man, we're just not putting ourselves out there to get sunlight, fresh air, talk to people, be around people. We're missing out on encouragement, life, just the hustle and bustle of life can do a lot for us when we're feeling down. So um it just gets us into a pretty dark place when we
Hmm.
isolate ourselves. It's not good for us. It's also not good for, whoever we live with, because we're going to be taking things out on them. So sometimes that's a motivator for people. Sometimes if they're struggling to feel motivated just for their own well-being, sometimes they'll feel motivated for their family's well-being. Like, man, I don't want to be a burden or a downer, to them every day. So I'm gonna go rake the leaves or just get some sunshine, or, call a friend, like something to just bring
Hmm.
some life and light into your day, so that you can, have some fresh air and fresh perspective and keep some hope.
Hmm. I always think about my time right out of college. I was sent to Huntington Beach, California, and one of the things that is always talked about there is called June gloom, and
Mm,
it's in June. The what they call the marine layer, the fog, comes in every morning and stays for most of the day, and
yeah.
so they termed it June gloom. Or you hear about it in Seattle, obviously, where it rains so much, and all those people that just don't see sunlight for all that time, and how just bad for your health it is, how bad for your mental health it is, whether you know it or not. It's just it just weighs on you more than you'll ever know. And I know in times when I've isolated myself, either consciously or subconsciously, you normally recognize it later that you've done that.
Yeah.
I know that I look back, and those are obviously the darkest times of just not being able to pull yourself through anything. You're just wailing in this what feels like an ocean of, and you're thrashing around um trying to get out of the ocean, and you just don't even realize that you just need to put your feet on the ground and walk a
Yes.
couple steps to get out of the ocean. So I want to make sure that I respect your time, and I do have one final question for you. Um, being that we've talked about the different stages, we've talked about isolating and people losing their identity and things like that. When do you feel what someone is going through is more than something that they can pull themselves out of? Or if we're talking to a spouse who's recognizing these symptoms in their spouse and they don't seem to be able to move to the next stage and get closer to acceptance of this, and seem to be going farther and farther down,
Yeah.
what do you think is or when do you think is the time that maybe they need to come to someone like you, because they just don't seem to be equipped to be able to pull themselves out? So when would you recommend that become an option for someone, um, to deal with these issues?
Yeah. Um, I think the biggest sign is going to be when whatever you're dealing with is really affecting your day-to-day life. So maybe that looks like you're unable to get out of bed in the morning. You're not interacting with your family in a way that's typical for you. Um, you're more emotional than typical. You're isolating too much. Like, just the ripple effects are getting bigger, right? And your day-to-day life's really being affected in a negative way. I think that's a great time to just get a third party in on the situation. And that's what's so great about a therapist is you can talk to them so freely. You don't have to worry about hurting their feelings or You don't have to listen to us back the way that you might with your spouse. You might want to listen after you talk for a while. Like, you get the whole floor for the whole time. And it's just such a good chance to say things that need to be said, hear yourself saying some things out loud so your brain can process it in a different way than when you sit at home on the couch alone thinking about it all. So yeah, I would say, like, if your spouse is coming to you and saying, I'm concerned, try to really take heed and hear what they're saying and be willing, even if you've never had a counselor before. It's not as scary, or I don't know, it's not as bad as you might think it is.
Right. Right. Well, Anna, thank you so much for joining
Yeah.
me, and spreading some of this, expertise that you have acquired. So, if people are listening to this and they want to find you, um, either to talk to you or maybe of a good technique, maybe they have some questions for you. How can they find you?
I think the best place is just my website, which is annaneedham.com. You'll be able to contact me on there. And yeah, I'd love to chat with anyone that has questions or needs some help.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Anna. Have a
Yeah,
have a good
thanks so
one.
much. You too.
Well, that concludes this episode of the Job Seeker's Journey podcast. If you like what you heard from Anna and you'd like to talk to her more, and you live in Colorado, Texas, or Oklahoma, you can go to www.annaneedham.com. It'll be in the show notes, and you can send her a message directly or give her a call, and I'm sure she would be happy to schedule a session with you. I want to make sure I thank you from the bottom of my heart for listening to this podcast. It is a mission of mine to bring information to job seekers who don't know what they don't know and are in need of help while they go through their job search journey. If you like this podcast, do me a favor, rate it on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, give it a review so that it can get in front of more and more people. If you're on LinkedIn, please share these informations with those you know that have the open to work banner. You can also go to my website, www.thejobseekersjourney.com. There you'll find the podcast, some information about me, a blog that will be up, as well as soon we'll have other things, other resources for job seekers. If you're on YouTube and you're watching this, please hit that subscribe button so that it gets in front of more people. You'll also be able to find the video podcast on the website. Or if you're just into audio only, it'll be on all podcast platforms. But that'll do it for this episode. My name is Brad Stair. I'm very, very excited that you're here. And from all of us here at the Job Seekers Journey podcast, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you soon.